Tomorrow we finally convince Helen she can't manage her finances alone. Those were the words glowing on my daughter-in-law's tablet at 12:43 in the morning while I stood alone in my kitchen wearing my old blue robe and holding a mug of chamomile tea that suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. The tablet had been sitting on the corner of my dining table since dinner, forgotten beside the empty pie dish Ashley promised to return for Thanksgiving next week. I should have looked away. I know that. At 68 years old, I was raised to believe privacy mattered. But the message stayed there on the screen, bright against the dark house, almost as if it wanted me to see it. My fingers tightened around the mug as another notification appeared beneath it. The doctor appointment next Tuesday should help document her memory decline. I felt the blood drain from my face. Memory decline. They were talking about me. For a moment, I truly believed there had to be some misunderstanding. Some terrible mistake. Ethan would never discuss me like that. Not my son. Not the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he was afraid of lightning. Not the man who kissed my forehead at his father's funeral and promised he would always take care of me. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence while I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. This one from Ethan himself. Mom trusts me. That's why this will work. I stopped breathing. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. Too warm. My late husband Walter used to say bad news arrives quietly. He was right. It doesn't crash through the front door. It slips into your life softly while you're still washing dishes from family dinner. I slowly set my tea down beside the sink, afraid my shaking hands might drop the cup. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows of the house Walter and I spent 37 years paying off together. Every inch of this home carried our life inside it. The faded scratch near the pantry door from when Ethan rode his tricycle indoors at age 6. The oak cabinets Walter insisted on building himself during one hot July when we couldn't afford contractors. The framed family photos lining the hallway. Christmas mornings. Birthdays. Graduations. I suddenly wondered how long my son had been planning to take it all away from me. My chest tightened as I reached toward the tablet. The group chat was called Helping Mom Transition. There were 43 unread messages. Ashley's profile picture smiled back at me beside tiny gray bubbles filled with words that made my stomach twist. If we move carefully, she'll never realize what's happening. The attorney said we need more examples before discussing conservatorship. Once the house sells, Ethan can finally pay off the business loan. I stared at the last message for a long time. Conservatorship. They were trying to convince people I couldn't take care of myself anymore. My knees weakened, and I lowered myself slowly into the dining room chair Walter bought me on our 25th anniversary. The same chair Ashley once said looked outdated and depressing. I remembered how she smiled when she said it. Ashley always smiled when she was being cruel. Polite cruelty. That was her specialty. Suddenly, dozens of little moments from the past 2 years came rushing back into my mind all at once. Ashley insisting on driving me to appointments even when I said I was fine. Ethan gently correcting me in front of people whenever I forgot a small detail. The way Ashley once laughed softly and told her sister, Helen gets confused sometimes, after I misplaced my reading glasses for 20 minutes. I thought they were worried about me. I thought they loved me. Another message appeared on the screen. Tomorrow's meeting at 10 a.m., don't let her suspect anything. I looked toward the dark hallway leading to my bedroom and realized something that hurt worse than losing Walter. My son and his wife had already decided who I was becoming. Weak, confused, disposable, and they were counting on me never finding out. I do not know how long I sat there staring at that tablet while the rain slid down the kitchen windows in thin silver lines. The messages kept coming every few minutes, casual and calm in a way that somehow made them even crueler. Ashley spoke about me the same way people discuss. Replacing an old refrigerator or selling a car that no longer runs properly. Efficient, detached, temporary. My eyes burned from reading, but I could not stop. One message from Ashley's younger sister made my stomach twist. Honestly, Helen should already be in assisted living. She looks exhausted every time I see her. Ashley responded almost immediately. Exactly. Ethan just feels guilty because she is his mother. Guilty. That word stayed with me. Not love. Not concern. Guilt. I looked toward the framed photograph sitting beside the lamp in the dining room. Walter and I stood smiling on a beach in Cape Cod 15 summers ago, his arm around my waist while the wind pushed my hair across my face. He looked so steady in that picture, so certain. Walter always believed people revealed who they truly were when money became involved. Back then I thought he was too suspicious, too cautious. But sitting there in the middle of the night, listening to the refrigerator hum softly in the silence, I realized my husband had seen dangers I refused to imagine. I clicked further into the group chat. There were months of messages. Months. My chest tightened harder with every scroll. Ashley had documented nearly everything I did. Helen forgot where she parked at Target today. She repeated the same story twice at dinner. She almost left the stove on after making soup. Tiny things. Human things. The kind of moments that happen to everyone eventually. But together, carefully arranged and exaggerated, they painted the picture of a woman losing control of her mind. I suddenly remembered the afternoon Ashley insisted on installing cameras around the outside of my house for safety. At the time, I thanked her. I even baked her peach cobbler afterward because I felt touched by her kindness. Now I wondered whether every act of care had actually been surveillance. I pressed my fingertips against my temple and tried to steady my breathing. The house felt different now. Unsafe somehow. Like invisible cracks had spread through the walls while I was too blind to notice. Upstairs, the floor creaked softly as the old pipes shifted from the cold weather. Walter used to joke that the house sighed at night, like an old man settling into bed. I missed him so much in that moment I thought the ache might split me in half. If he were here, none of this would be happening. Ethan would never have dared. But Walter had been gone for nearly 3 years now, and grief changes the balance inside a family. The people you trust begin rearranging your life while pretending it is for your own good. Another message appeared on the screen from Ethan. The attorney said we need her to sign voluntarily if possible. Ashley replied with a thumbs-up emoji before writing, "Leave that to me. Helen hates conflict. She will fold if we pressure her gently." Fold. My own daughter-in-law believed I would simply surrender my home because she smiled sweetly enough while asking. I leaned back slowly in the chair and stared at the dark reflection of myself in the kitchen window. For the first time in my life, I looked old to myself. Not because of my silver hair or the lines around my eyes, but because I suddenly understood how easily older people disappear once their families decide they are inconvenient. The terrible part was not even the money. It was the humiliation. The quiet betrayal unfolding behind polite dinners and birthday flowers and cheerful phone calls asking whether I needed groceries. Ashley always hugged me before leaving the house. Ethan always called me Mom in that soft voice that sounded so sincere. And all the while, they were preparing documents to prove I could no longer manage my own life. My hand stopped shaking after a while. That surprised me. I expected tears, anger, panic. Instead, something colder settled inside me. Something painfully clear. I reached for my reading glasses and began taking photographs of every message with my phone one by one. Slowly, carefully. My late husband once told me that panic helps the person trying to control you. Calmness terrifies them. By the time the grandfather clock struck 2 in the morning, I had photographed nearly 200 screenshots. Then I came across a message that made my entire body go still. Ashley had written, "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Once Helen signs the temporary financial authorization forms, everything else becomes easier." I read that sentence 3 times before lowering the phone into my lap. Tomorrow morning. They were coming here tomorrow morning to take control of my life. And they believed I would never see it coming. I did not sleep that night. Around 3:30 in the morning, I turned off the kitchen light, carried Ashley's tablet into the guest room, and placed it carefully on the dresser exactly where she had forgotten it. Then I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the ceiling while shadows from the rain moved softly across the walls. Beside me, Walter's side of the bed remained untouched the way it had for nearly 3 years. I still could not bring myself to sleep there. Some losses settle into a house permanently. The silence felt heavier than usual that night, as if the walls themselves understood something inside this family had broken beyond repair. Around 6 in the morning, I finally got up and made coffee. My hands moved automatically through familiar routines. I measured the grounds, filled the kettle, opened the curtains over the kitchen sink. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful beneath the gray November sky. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street, while a jogger passed wearing bright orange running shoes. Ordinary life continued as though my world had not tilted sideways overnight. I poured coffee into Walter's favorite mug before catching myself. I still did that sometimes. Small habits grief never fully erases. I stood there for a moment staring at the steam curling upward before quietly pouring the second cup down the sink. By 7:30, I had already showered, dressed, and printed every screenshot from the group chat at the small printer Walter bought years ago for tax season. The stack of papers sat neatly beside me on the dining room table now. Evidence. That word sounded strange in my head. Evidence was for courtrooms and crimes and strangers on television. Not families. Not sons. I kept thinking about Ethan as a boy. The way he used to run home after Little League games with grass stains on his knees and dirt on his cheeks. He cried for 2 days straight after Walter buried our old golden retriever in the backyard because he could not stand the thought of losing something he loved. Somewhere along the way, that soft-hearted little boy disappeared, replaced by a man quietly helping his wife build a case against his own mother. At 8:15, my phone rang. Ashley. I let it ring twice before answering. Good morning, Helen, she said brightly, her voice warm and cheerful in the way that now made my skin crawl. I think I accidentally left my tablet at your house last night. I looked toward the guest room doorway. You did, I answered calmly. I will bring it by later. Oh, no need, Ashley replied quickly. Too quickly. Ethan and I are already heading over soon anyway. Of course they were. I wrapped one hand tighter around the coffee mug. That is thoughtful, I said softly. There was a small pause on the line before Ashley spoke again. Are you still all right for our little meeting this morning? Little meeting. Such harmless words for something so calculated. Of course, I answered. I would not miss it. After we hung up, I sat perfectly still for several seconds listening to the ticking clock in the hallway. My heart should have been racing. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Clear. Like someone who finally understands the rules of a game everyone else started long ago. At 9:45, Ethan's silver SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched through the front window as Ashley stepped out first carrying a paper bag from the bakery downtown. She always brought pastries when she wanted to appear caring. Ethan followed behind her holding a leather folder against his chest. The sight of it made my stomach tighten. Papers, forms, signatures, decisions about my life already prepared before they even walked through the front door. Ashley smiled brightly the moment I opened it. Helen, we brought cinnamon rolls from Maple Street Bakery, she said while leaning forward to kiss my cheek. I caught the familiar scent of her expensive perfume, vanilla and jasmine. For years I associated that smell with family dinners and Christmas mornings. Now it smelled like deception. Ethan avoided my eyes as he stepped inside. That hurt more than anything else. Morning, Mom, he said quietly. Mom. He still sounded gentle. That was the terrible part. Cruel people are easier to survive when they look cruel. But Ethan still looked like my son. Ashley walked into the kitchen and immediately spotted the tablet sitting untouched on the counter where I had moved it earlier that morning. I watched relief flash across her face for half a second before she covered it with another polished smile. Oh good, she laughed lightly. I was worried I lost my whole life in there. You almost did, I thought silently. Ethan placed the leather folder carefully on the dining room table beside my untouched coffee cup. Then he finally looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. There was nervousness in his expression now. Guilt too. But not enough to stop what they came here to do. Ashley sat down beside the folder and folded her hands neatly in front of her. Helen, she began softly. We wanted to talk about making life a little easier for you moving forward. I looked at the leather folder sitting between us on the dining room table and suddenly remembered another folder from 26 years earlier. Back then, Ethan had been 14 years old, nervous about applying to a private high school summer program in Boston. Walter and I stayed up half the night helping him organize paperwork because he was afraid of making mistakes. He kept saying, "What if I am not smart enough?" Walter put both hands on his shoulders and told him something I never forgot. The people who love you should never make you feel small in order to control you. Sitting across from my son now, I wondered if he remembered that conversation at all. Ashley opened the folder carefully, her manicured nails perfectly polished in pale pink. Everything about her always looked controlled, even her smile. We know things have been difficult since Walter passed away, she said gently. And Ethan and I just want to help reduce some stress for you. I nodded slowly as though I believed her. That is kind, I said quietly. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside her. He still would not fully meet my eyes. Ashley slid several papers across the table toward me. These are simply temporary financial authorization forms, she explained. Nothing major. This would just allow Ethan to help manage certain responsibilities if needed. Temporary. Simple. Help. Every word had been carefully chosen to sound harmless. I glanced down at the documents without touching them. Legal language covered the pages in dense black print. Durable power of attorney. Financial authority. Asset management permissions. My chest tightened slightly despite my calm expression. They really thought I would sign my independence away over cinnamon rolls and polite concern. Ashley leaned forward sympathetically. We have noticed you seem overwhelmed lately, Helen. There it was. The performance had begun. I folded my hands together in my lap to stop myself from reacting too quickly. Overwhelmed. I repeated softly. Just little things. Ashley continued with practiced warmth. Forgetting appointments. Losing track of bills. Repeating conversations. It happens to everyone eventually. Ethan finally spoke then, his voice low and careful. We are just trying to protect you, Mom. Protect me. I almost laughed at the cruelty hidden inside that word. Instead, I looked toward the kitchen window where rain still streaked softly across the glass. Do you remember when Walter had pneumonia 10 years ago? I asked suddenly. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. What? Your father? I continued calmly. Do you remember what he told the doctors when they wanted him to stay in the hospital longer? Ethan hesitated before nodding slowly. He said he wanted to recover at home. Because he believed dignity matters, I answered quietly. Silence settled across the room for several seconds. Ashley recovered first. She crossed one leg elegantly and smiled again, though the warmth in it looked thinner now. Of course, dignity matters, she said. This is exactly why we want to make sure everything is organized before there is a real emergency. Organized. Another careful word. I studied her face closely then. Ashley never raised her voice. Never insulted me directly. That was what made her dangerous. She wrapped control inside kindness until people thanked her for taking things away from them. Suddenly, I remembered dozens of moments I once dismissed. Ashley insisting on speaking for me during medical appointments. Ashley gently correcting me when I told stories at family dinners. Ashley once taking my car keys after I missed a freeway exit and saying, maybe we should let Ethan handle the driving from now on. At the time, I believed she was concerned about me. Now I saw something else entirely. Conditioning. Tiny humiliations repeated slowly over years until a person begins doubting herself. Ethan cleared his throat nervously. Mom, nobody is forcing you to do anything. That sentence almost hurt worse than the documents themselves because people only say that when pressure is already happening. I looked directly at him then. Really looked at him. His hair had more gray in it now than Walter ever did at the same age. The lines around his eyes deepened whenever he avoided conflict. For one brief second, I saw guilt flicker across his face again. Ashley must have noticed it too because she reached over and gently touched his wrist. A silent reminder. A signal. Continue. Helen, she said softly, you know we love you. Love. Such a beautiful word to use while trying to quietly remove someone's control over her own life. I lowered my gaze to the papers again and let the silence stretch longer than either of them seemed comfortable with. Then I reached slowly toward the folder. Ashley visibly relaxed. Ethan let out a small breath. They thought I was giving in. They thought the frightened older woman sitting across from them had no idea what was really happening. My fingertips rested lightly on the top page while my heart beat slow and steady inside my chest. Then I looked up and asked the one question neither of them expected. Before I sign anything, I said calmly, would either of you like to explain the group chat called Helping Mom Transition? The room became so quiet I could hear the rainwater dripping from the gutters outside. Ashley's smile disappeared first. Not dramatically, just slowly, like a light dimming behind her eyes. Ethan looked at me as though he had forgotten how to breathe. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded beside the stack of unsigned papers while the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway behind us. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded almost peaceful compared to the expression on my son's face. What group chat? Ashley finally asked, though her voice had gone thinner now. Careful. Measured. I looked directly at her. The one discussing conservatorship, I answered quietly. The one documenting my so-called decline. The one planning how to pressure me into signing away financial control. Ethan immediately turned toward Ashley, panic flickering across his features for the first time that morning. You left the tablet unlocked? he whispered harshly. Ashley shot him a sharp look. Do not do that, she snapped softly. This is not entirely my fault. There it was. Not apology. Not shame. Blame. I watched them carefully while they unraveled in front of me. Walter used to say that pressure reveals character faster than comfort ever will. He was right. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face and stood up abruptly from the table. Mom, listen to me, he said quickly. It is not what it looks like. I almost smiled at that because betrayal always sounds ridiculous once exposed. Really? I asked gently, because it looked very organized. Ashley straightened in her chair, recovering faster than Ethan. She had always been better under pressure. Helen, she said calmly, you took private conversations completely out of context. Out of context, I repeated softly. Was it also out of context when you wrote that I would fold under pressure? A faint flush climbed into Ashley's cheeks. Ethan closed his eyes briefly like a man standing in front of an approaching storm. Mom, we were worried about you, he said. You have been forgetting things lately. That sentence settled heavily between us. I stared at my son for several seconds before answering. I forgot where I parked at Target one afternoon, Ethan. I did not forget who raised you. He looked away immediately. Ashley leaned forward again, determined to regain control of the conversation. Nobody is trying to hurt you, she said. This was about protecting your future. My future, I asked quietly. Or your business loan? Ethan's head snapped toward me so fast the movement almost startled him. That told me enough. Silence spread across the dining room again. Outside, a passing truck splashed through rainwater along the curb. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice before everything fell quiet once more. Ordinary sounds. Normal life continuing while my family collapsed around my dining room table. Ashley's expression hardened slightly now that the performance was slipping. Helen, she said carefully, you are making this emotional. I let those words sit there for a moment because they revealed more truth than she intended. Emotional. That was how people dismissed older women whenever we became inconvenient. If we stayed quiet, we were weak. If we defended ourselves, we were unstable. I reached slowly toward the stack of printed screenshots beside me and slid them across the table one by one. Ethan stared at the pages like they might catch fire in his hands. Ashley read silently at first, but I noticed her jaw tighten with every line. Once the house sells, Ethan can finally pay off the business debt. We need more examples before discussing conservatorship. Helen hates conflict. She will sign if we make her feel guilty enough. Ethan lowered himself back into the chair looking pale and exhausted. Mom, he whispered, I never wanted this to happen like this. I looked at him for a very long time before answering. Then how exactly did you want it to happen? He had no response for that. Ashley finally pushed the papers aside with visible frustration. Fine, she said coldly. You saw the messages. But somebody has to be realistic here. This house is too much for you now. The stairs, the maintenance, the taxes. Ethan and I are trying to think ahead because you refused to. There was at last. The polished mask finally cracking enough for the truth underneath to show. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. Interesting, I said softly. Because Walter and I already planned ahead years ago. Both of them looked at me sharply. For the first time since entering my house that morning, Ashley looked uncertain. What does that mean? She asked slowly. I stood up carefully from the table and walked toward the hallway cabinet where Walter kept important documents for nearly 3 decades. My slippers moved softly across the hardwood floor while neither of them spoke behind me. I opened the bottom drawer and removed a dark blue folder Ethan had clearly never seen before. Walter always believed preparation was an act of love. Back then I thought he meant retirement accounts and insurance policies. Standing there with that folder in my hands, I finally understood he meant protection too. I turned back toward my son and daughter-in-law and saw something new in their faces now. Fear. The blue folder felt heavier in my hands than it should have. Walter had placed it in that cabinet himself 6 months before he died, carefully labeling the tab in his neat handwriting. For Helen. At the time, I laughed and told him he was being dramatic. Walter simply smiled and said, Preparation is not pessimism. It is protection. I carried the folder back to the dining room table while Ethan and Ashley watched me in complete silence. Even the air in the room felt different now. Tighter. More fragile. I sat down slowly and opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were trust documents, legal letters, property records, and one sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Walter's handwriting. My throat tightened the moment I saw it. I had never opened the envelope before. Somehow I always believed doing so would make losing him feel permanent. Ashley tried to recover her composure first. "Helen," she said carefully, "whatever Walter prepared years ago may not reflect your current situation." I looked at her calmly. "Interesting," I replied softly. "Because according to your messages, you believed I was too confused to understand my current situation at all." Ethan lowered his head immediately. Ashley did not answer. I removed the trust documents first and placed them neatly on the table. Walter transferred this house into a protected family trust nearly 2 years before he passed away, I explained quietly. Ethan frowned in confusion. "What? The property cannot be sold without my direct approval while I remain mentally competent," I continued. "And according to Walter's attorney, competency must be evaluated by an independent specialist chosen by the trust itself, not by family members." Ashley's expression changed instantly. Not shock exactly. Calculation. Her mind was already searching for another angle. I recognized that look now. "That still does not change the fact that we are concerned about you," she said evenly. I nodded once. "No," I answered. "It changes the fact that you planned this without understanding the legal situation." Ethan rubbed both hands against his forehead like a man developing a headache. "Mom," he said quietly, "why would Dad hide this from me?" I stared at him for several seconds before answering. "Maybe because your father understood people better than I did. That hurt him." I saw it immediately in his face. But pain and truth often arrive together. Slowly, I picked up the sealed envelope from the folder and traced Walter's handwriting with my thumb. The room had become so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming again in the kitchen. Even Ashley stopped speaking. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, though I could not tell whether it came from grief or anger or both. "My dearest Helen," the letter began. I swallowed hard before continuing aloud. "If you are reading this, then something has happened that made you question whether people around you truly have your best interests at heart." Ethan looked up sharply. Ashley remained perfectly still. Walter's words settled over the room like another presence sitting beside me. "I know how kind you are," I continued reading softly. "Sometimes kinder than the world deserves. That kindness is one of the reasons I love you. But it also means you trust people long after they stop deserving it." My vision blurred for a moment. Walter knew. Somehow, years before any of this happened, he knew. Ethan looked devastated now. Ashley looked unsettled for the first time since entering my home. "The attorney handling the trust has instructions to protect you if anyone attempts to pressure, manipulate, or isolate you regarding financial decisions," I read. "Especially family." Ashley finally spoke again, though her voice sounded colder now. "This is ridiculous. We are not criminals." I lowered the letter slowly and looked directly at her. "No," I said quietly. "You are something much harder to recognize." Ethan suddenly stood up from the table and walked toward the kitchen window, his shoulders tense beneath his gray sweater. Rain still fell softly outside while he stared into the backyard where Walter once spent entire summers gardening. "Mom," he whispered after a long silence, "I swear I never wanted to hurt you." I watched my son carefully then. For the first time all morning, he looked less like a partner in Ashley's plan and more like a frightened little boy caught doing something shameful. But shame after betrayal does not erase betrayal itself. Ashley remained seated beside the unsigned papers, her jaw tight with frustration now that control was slipping from her hands. "We are trying to think practically," she said firmly. "You are 68 years old, Helen. Things change." I folded Walter's letter carefully and returned it to the envelope before answering her. "Yes," I said softly. "They do." Then I looked directly at Ethan. "The question is whether character changes too." Neither of them spoke after that. The silence stretched across the dining room like cracked ice ready to split apart beneath all of us. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the grief and humiliation and heartbreak, something else quietly began to grow. Strength. After Ethan and Ashley left that afternoon, the house felt unnaturally quiet. The kind of silence that settles after a storm passes, but before the damage is fully understood. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time, watching rainwater drip from the oak tree branches outside, while Walter's letter rested folded beside me on the counter. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. So had the cinnamon rolls Ashley brought from the bakery. They still sat untouched in the box near the dining room table, like props abandoned after a performance. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan. Mom, can we please talk later when everyone calms down? Everyone. As though we had all somehow shared equal responsibility for what happened that morning. I stared at the message without replying. Then another arrived a few minutes later. Ashley was coming from a place of concern, even if it came out wrong. Concern. It amazed me how people could use gentle words to disguise ugly intentions. I placed the phone face down on the counter and walked slowly through the house instead. The living room still smelled faintly like Walter's old cedar cologne because I kept one of his sweaters folded over the armchair beside the fireplace. Mia once asked me why I never washed it. I told her some scents feel too connected to love to lose completely. Upstairs, I paused outside the guest bedroom where Ashley's tablet had rested the night before. It was strange how one forgotten object could split a family into before and after. Before the messages, I still believed I was safe inside my own life. After them, every memory felt different somehow. I thought about all the times Ashley insisted on helping organize my finances over the past year. The way she encouraged Ethan to speak to me about downsizing. The brochures for retirement communities she casually left on my kitchen counter, just in case. Back then I convinced myself they were trying to help. Now I understood something painful about manipulation. The most dangerous kind rarely feels cruel at first. Around 5 o'clock, my best friend Carol called. The moment I heard her voice, something inside me weakened slightly. Carol and I met 32 years ago volunteering at the elementary school Christmas fair when Ethan and her daughter were both in 3rd grade. She had seen me through births, funerals, marriages, illnesses, and every ordinary heartbreak life quietly piles onto women over time. You sound tired, she said immediately after I answered. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I think my family tried to take my life away from me this morning, I said quietly. The line went silent for several seconds. Then Carol asked only one question. How bad is it? I closed my eyes and looked toward the rain-covered window. Worse than I realized. An hour later, Carol arrived carrying takeout soup from the diner downtown and a grocery bag filled with lemon cookies she knew Walter loved. The moment she stepped inside, she looked at my face and understood this was not a situation fixable with comforting words. We sat together at the dining room table while dusk settled softly outside the windows. I handed her the screenshots one by one without speaking much. Carol read silently for nearly 20 minutes. Sometimes her mouth tightened. Sometimes she shook her head slowly. Once she whispered, "Oh, Helen," under her breath in a way that sounded almost heartbroken. When she finally looked up from the papers, her eyes had changed. "This was planned," she said firmly. "Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just factual." I nodded once. Saying the truth aloud somehow made it feel even heavier. Carol leaned back in the chair and folded her arms tightly. "You know what scares me most?" she asked quietly. "Ashley is not behaving impulsively. This is calculated." I looked down at Walter's letter resting beside my hand. "Walter knew something like this might happen," I admitted softly. Carol glanced toward the envelope. "Good men usually notice danger before kind women do." That sentence stayed with me. Kind women. I used to think kindness guaranteed safety inside a family. Now I understood kindness without boundaries only teaches people how far they can push you. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked around the dining room slowly. The polished oak table Walter refinished himself one summer. The old chandelier above us. The framed school pictures of Ethan lining the hallway. So much of my life lived inside these walls. Then I thought about Ashley's message again. Helen hates conflict. She will sign if we make her feel guilty enough. Something cold and steady settled deeper inside me. "They think I am weak because I stayed gentle," I said quietly. "That was their first mistake." Carol studied my face carefully for a moment before giving a slow nod. "There you are," she whispered. I was wondering when Helen Parker would finally come back. The next morning, the rain finally stopped. Pale sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors as I stood in the kitchen making oatmeal the way Walter liked it, with cinnamon and sliced bananas even though I was the only one eating now. Something about returning to ordinary routines steadied me. Grief had taught me that survival often begins with small things. Making the bed, watering plants, folding towels, continuing. My phone remained silent until nearly 10 o'clock. Then Ethan called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said carefully. His voice sounded exhausted, as though he had barely slept. "Ashley and I were hoping we could come by tonight and talk again." I stirred the oatmeal slowly without answering right away. "Talk about what?" I asked softly. A pause stretched across the line. "Everything," he finally admitted. "Yesterday got out of control." Out of control. Another interesting phrase. As though betrayal simply wandered into the room accidentally, and nobody knew how it happened. I carried my bowl to the dining room table and sat beneath the old chandelier Walter installed himself 20 years ago after saving for months to afford it. "I do not think yesterday was out of control," I said quietly. "I think yesterday was very carefully planned." Ethan exhaled heavily into the phone. "Mom, please." There was genuine strain in his voice now. For the first time since discovering the messages, I sensed something cracking inside him. Guilt maybe. Fear too. But still not honesty. "Come at 6. I answered calmly before ending the call. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Carol came over again around noon carrying tulips from the grocery store and enough determination for both of us. Together, we organized the screenshots, trust documents, and Walter's letter into neat folders across the dining room table. At one point, Carol looked up from the paperwork and said, "You know Ashley is going to try changing the story tonight." I nodded once. "I know." "And Ethan?" she asked gently. That question hurt more. I stared down at Walter's handwriting for several seconds before answering. "I still do not know whether my son is weak or cruel." Carol did not respond to that, because some truths are too painful for friends to touch directly. Around 5:30, I changed into a dark green sweater Walter always said brought out my eyes. I brushed my silver hair carefully and put on lipstick for the first time in weeks. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I wanted to remind myself who I was before people started treating me like someone fragile and fading away. By 6 o'clock, the house smelled faintly of rosemary chicken and fresh bread. I cooked dinner anyway. Old habits. Family habits. Maybe part of me still wanted one final chance to recognize my son across the table. Ethan and Ashley arrived exactly on time. Ashley carried another bakery box. Different pastries this time. Same performance. "Something smells wonderful," she said brightly as she stepped inside. I noticed immediately how carefully controlled her expression looked now. She was rebuilding the mask. Ethan appeared tired, his shoulders tense beneath his navy coat. Neither of them mentioned the previous morning at first. We sat through dinner discussing harmless things instead. Weather, traffic, Mia's school recital next month. The conversation felt painfully artificial, like actors reciting lines in a play none of us believed anymore. Halfway through dinner, Ashley finally placed her fork down gently. "Helen," she began softly, "we really want to move forward from yesterday." I dabbed my napkin carefully against my lips before answering. "Do you?" Ashley nodded immediately. "Families say hurtful things sometimes. Stress affects everyone." I looked directly at her. "You documented my supposed mental decline for nearly a year." Her expression tightened slightly. Ethan stared at his plate. "We handled it badly," Ashley admitted. "But our intentions were good." I almost admired how committed she remained to that narrative. Even now, even after exposure. "Good intentions usually do not involve secret group chats," I replied quietly. Ethan finally looked up then. His eyes appeared red around the edges. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "I know I failed you." The honesty in that sentence hit harder than all the excuses. Before it, for one dangerous moment, I almost softened. Then I remembered the screenshots, the paperwork, the messages discussing pressure and guilt and control. Love without accountability becomes permission for betrayal. Ashley reached for Ethan's hand beneath the table. "We can still fix this," she insisted softly. I studied the two of them sitting across from me beneath the warm dining room light. My son looked broken. Ashley looked determined. And suddenly I understood something clearly. Ethan still believed this situation could somehow return to normal. Ashley believed she could still regain control. Neither of them realized the real damage had already happened long before yesterday morning. Trust, once broken inside a family, does not return because people ask politely. I folded my hands together calmly on the table and looked at my son for a long moment before speaking. "Tomorrow morning," I said quietly, "I am meeting with Walter's attorney." The color drained from Ashley's face instantly. Ashley stopped chewing completely. For the first time since I met her 12 years ago, I saw a genuine panic flicker openly across her face before she could hide it. Ethan looked between us slowly, exhaustion carved deep into his expression now. The dining room suddenly felt smaller somehow, crowded with all the things none of us could pretend anymore. "There is no reason to involve attorneys," Ashley said quickly, setting down her fork with forced calm. "We can work this out privately as a family." Family. That word sounded fragile now, like glass already cracked before someone touches it. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. "You involved attorneys first," I reminded her softly. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as if the sentence physically hurt him. "Mom," he whispered, "please." I looked at my son for a long moment. The little boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a bird's nest in the backyard. The teenager who hugged me after his first heartbreak and said he hoped he would someday love someone as deeply as Walter loved me. Somewhere along the way, adulthood hollowed something out inside him. Or maybe Ashley simply found the emptiness that was already there. "Tomorrow is not punishment," I said quietly. "Tomorrow is protection." Ashley leaned back in her chair, her polished composure beginning to fracture again. "You are making us sound manipulative and greedy," she said coldly. "Because you secretly discussed conservatorship, financial control, and selling my home," I answered evenly. "What exactly would you call that?" She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face again before speaking in a low, strained voice. "Mom, the business is struggling." The honesty startled even Ashley. Her head turned sharply toward him. "Ethan," she warned quietly. But something inside him seemed too exhausted to continue pretending. He stared down at the table while speaking. "We lost 2 major clients this year. We are behind on payroll. The bank is threatening legal action if we cannot restructure debt by January." Silence settled heavily over the room after that confession. Ashley's jaw tightened visibly. She looked furious not because Ethan admitted the truth, but because he lost control of the narrative. I sat very still absorbing his words. Suddenly, so many pieces fit together. The pressure, the urgency, the discussions about my house, Ashley's obsession with financial authorization forms. They were drowning quietly and decided the easiest life raft was me. "You should have told me," I said softly to Ethan. His eyes filled immediately with shame. "I could not," he admitted. "Dad trusted me to build something successful. I already felt like I failed him. Walter, even now my husband remained at the center of this family long after death. His expectations, his values, his absence." Ashley crossed her arms tightly. "We were trying to solve problems before things got worse," she said defensively. "By convincing me I was mentally incompetent." I asked quietly. She did not answer. Outside, evening settled fully over the neighborhood now. Reflections from the dining room chandelier shimmered against the dark windows while distant headlights moved silently across wet streets. Everything looked calm from the outside. That was the strange thing about family betrayals. Neighbors never hear the exact moment trust dies. Ethan suddenly looked older to me than he ever had before. Not physically, spiritually. Like a man who spent too long compromising pieces of himself until he barely recognized what remained. "I am sorry," he said finally. The words came out rough and uneven. Real this time. I believe that much at least. Ashley remained silent beside him. I realized then that she still viewed this situation as negotiable, manageable, something she might still steer back under control if she stayed composed long enough. But the truth about manipulation is that once exposed clearly in daylight, it can never return to hiding comfortably again. I stood slowly from the table and carried our empty plates toward the kitchen sink. The ordinary movement steadied me. Water ran softly while I rinsed dishes beneath the warm light above the counter. For years, I built my life around taking care of other people inside this home. Feeding them, comforting them, protecting them. Tonight felt different somehow. Not because I stopped loving my son. That would almost be easier. No, the terrible thing was realizing love sometimes survives long after trust does. I dried my hands carefully before turning back toward them. Ethan looked exhausted. Ashley looked cornered. And I suddenly felt neither anger nor triumph. Only clarity. "Tomorrow morning," I said quietly, "Walter's attorney will update every legal protection connected to this house and trust." Ashley inhaled sharply. Ethan simply lowered his head. "And after that," I continued softly, I think we all need distance for a while." The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Ethan looked up at me, then, with something close to grief in his eyes. Ashley stared silently at the table. Somewhere in the hallway, the grandfather clock began chiming 9 o'clock. Slow, steady, certain. I listened to each note carefully while standing in the home Walter built with his own hands. The home they nearly convinced themselves I was too weak to keep. When the final chime faded into silence, I realized something important. They thought age made me easier to erase. What they forgot was that women like me survived every hard thing long before anyone started underestimating us.